Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Reformed Pendulum Podcast. Today, I have as my guest Caleb Goforth. I have known Caleb since really the year 2000, so for a really long period of time. We were housemates for 10 years, so we knew each other really well. So a little background on Caleb. He has 10 years of experience in IT. Almost that entire time, actually, we were coworkers. So that was another area where we had a lot in common. So like me, he was home educated all the way through high school and is proud of it. And he's a big Second Amendment advocate. I'm sure we'll talk more about that in future episodes. Currently, he's an active duty service member in the Air Force overseas right now. And so anyway, without any further ado, we're going to today talk about the halo effect of beauty. And is that a real thing? And if so, how and why, and to what extent does it extend? So there was a Wall Street Journal article that dealt with this that we're kind of using as a centerpiece for the discussion.
Yeah.
And so this is something Caleb and I have talked a lot about off and on, just because it's kind of a phenomenon we've both observed and experienced. And I think it's worth discussing so people are just aware of just the reality of how things work, and maybe what things will always be, and maybe what things could change if people were more self-aware. I guess to kick us off, the article states that a lot of people, and I want to first start off with females, because I think this dynamic functions differently when we're talking about the male halo effect of maybe physical attractiveness.
Right.
For females, articles basically states that we assume that, a woman who's attractive, that they're more intelligent, they're more trustworthy, and they have better character, and maybe more competent in whatever their craft is, whether, you're going to an architect or a bank or, what have you. So I know in a lot of circles, there's a discussion about white privilege, which that there's a lot of inconsistency, and I think it's a shallow look at things, but without, I guess, sidetracking ourselves.
Yeah.
I use that as an example of the whole idea of privilege. I do think beauty privilege is a real thing. And so a part of the article was talking about, well, what are the moral hazards of it? And I think
Yes.
where it can be a self-fulfilling prophecy is that if you are, and right now we're going to talk more about females at first, but we can get into males. But for those that have this halo effect, where people are unknowingly biased towards someone who's attractive, they get more opportunities, in their career, or, basically wherever they go. And so they might be put in positions or opportunities that they can take advantage of. And based on, that opportunity, they do take advantage of it. And then that leads to other opportunities, and they just kind of climb the chain. And so I think it's not that someone who's attractive is just totally incompetent. I think they get more opportunities maybe than other people who aren't, blessed.
Because people want to be around them. Yeah. Again,
Right.
if we're talking about women, if it's, men who are kind of controlling things or who are in power, there definitely could be, maybe, I don't know if you want to get into the whole motives thing, but if they like having pretty women around or in these positions, whatever they are, these different roles, then yeah, that's going to be an unfair advantage compared to other women who might not be as conventionally attractive.
Right. Yeah, and all the things we're talking about, I think there's hardly anyone that actually is self-aware that this is even happening. And I think even researchers who research this, while they see it from a large research aggregate, they themselves are still subject to these biases, even though they've done this research. It's hard to
because they're
catch
human.
yourself in real time. Yeah,
of course,
we're humans.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I was going to circle back to, I guess, the beauty bias and the moral hazards, for females. So I think
the princess
several
complex
things.
is what I call it. I think that's
right.
I didn't come up with that, obviously, but yeah.
Yeah, I think unfortunately, I mean, so there's always been a beauty bias, but I think now more than ever, I know there's been a couple of books that I've read that has basically stated now more than ever, there's a bias towards that. And because of that, people who may not be otherwise competent in a certain field, or maybe they don't have the best virtue or character, they're getting opportunities based on that, and other people who are more competent, who are more well aligned to do well in that job, or who have better character, are being passed up. And so I think if you're, looking for an employee, or you're thinking about, who's going to be a good friend to have, or and of course even a potential mate, but that's a whole nother area to unpack, because physical attractiveness is important for because it does signal, a woman's ability in general. It's a generality. It typically signals, hey, they have a good hormonal makeup, and
Right.
their chances of getting pregnant are and having really healthy
Right.
kids
Yeah.
are high. And so that's
Was it the
having
hip though?
kids
Was
is
it the
like one of the
hip to waist ratio and all that stuff?
yeah, the
Yeah.
point
Yeah. Yeah.
seven. Yeah,
Right.
and
Right.
so I mean, having kids is like one of the main points of marriage. So yeah, that should be high on the priority list. But when you're, trying to find someone for a job, you're not trying to have kids with them. Like you're wanting them to do their job well.
Right.
And so I think this is something the conservatives have been talking a lot about, is like, hey, like we should be hiring those who are competent to do a job well. Like if I want to hire, a plumber, I want them to be really good at plumbing. Could almost be integrated in with competency, which I think it actually is like, character, because someone could maybe have a lot of skills, but if they're
A bad
not
person.
going to show up on time, or they don't have the fortitude to push through a project, they may not have the character qualities to actually do well on that job. They
Oh,
might
for
have the
sure.
raw
Yes. So
skills.
competency is like, hey, he or she can do the job and
Right.
do it well. But will they do it? and will they see it through? Like, yeah, capability is one thing, but drive and personal character, obviously, yeah. But yeah, one thing I did want to actually comment on, it's right along the lines of beauty bias, is one of the places where it's incredibly obvious. I mean, just plain as day, you can see it, which I'm pretty confident this is going to be more of a you know blurrier area for you, but TikTok is a prime example of. I'll just say right now. I mean, I've been on all the different social media platforms for a while. I hate saying so definitely older. I watched the beginning of Instagram. I was there for the beginning of Zanga, which was the old blogging website with
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Zanga, Blogger. Of course, there was MySpace, and then also social media that really, when it came to its own, Instagram, Twitter, all the rest. But TikTok has the most aggressive algorithm I've ever seen. So if you were to take like the Instagram, the super aggressive algorithm is the Reels, which are it's all videos and slideshows. Wow, I don't even actually, I think it's just videos. TikTok has the slideshow capability, but my point is though, on TikTok you'll see content where there's an attractive female, posting about something that's either a monotonous task or it's like supposed to be relatable, like, oh, okay, that's kind of a relatable thing that they're talking about. And there's a common theme. Like, and I'm telling you, 90% of the time. There is the 10% where the thing is so relatable and hilarious, it doesn't matter what the person looks like. It's just good content. It's just funny. But there's like this huge percentage of TikTok content that's beauty bias on every steroid known to man. Because it's like the girl that's in it she's very attractive. Like, and not just like, I mean, like, we're talking like, she'll maybe have a very attractive face, gorgeous eyes, whatever. And I want to make sure I'm describing all this. I don't like the whole thing of objectifying. I mean, as dumb as it sounds, but I'm trying to paint the picture of it's absurd when you start to
Typical
like kind of
phenomenon
stop
that you're trying to
yourself.
describe.
Well, yeah. When you kind of stop yourself and you see some of these posts that have like hundreds of thousands of likes and millions of views, and then you apply this logic of, if this girl were really really obese or just ugly, bad teeth, like me, and then or who knows, like not attractive, would this have the amount of views it does? And if you really apply that rule when you're on TikTok and Instagram too, but I'm talking about TikTok because the algorithm is so aggressive. You
Seems to be on
start to
steroids, like you
you'll
said.
just start you'll start to just chuckle to yourself because you'll be like, no, this isn't super witty content. And by the way, this can apply to men to content that men post, but it's not nowhere near to the same degree because like they say, sex sells, and it's I mean in terms of visual media, like a hot girl is going to bring on traffic way way more than some jacked or attractive guy. So
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Like
and
women
I mean,
don't
and
pay attention
debating
to
that
that
is
near
just
as
stupid
much.
on its face. Yeah, so that's
Right.
just that should be a given. But anyway,
Women
that's the point
try
of it.
try to act like it's the same, but it's nowhere even remotely close.
Yeah,
I mean, like
yeah,
here's an example. You know, if you get mailers, like those neighborhood coupon mailers, that there could be, a ad for like a water filter, and there'll be a woman holding, a water filter, and it's like there's hardly, and typically it's being marketed more to stuff that guys would do, in terms of installing the home, but it's actually a woman who's like, pointing at the product, holding the product, you
yeah,
know, and in all reality, you know, in the cultures being, marketed to, guys are the ones who are typically dealing with that. So it's
right.
completely, I mean, 100%, they're trying to market based on knowing the guys have a beauty bias.
Yeah,
One of the things that I wanted to circle back to is what can happen to a female in these days in terms of her character and her development. I, I am thinking more deeply about this because I have a daughter who's literally only going to be born in the next couple months, and so
yeah, yeah.
I have an attractive wife, and I don't think I'm bad looking either. So I'm pretty sure she's going to be pretty attractive. So I want to think about
Lord help you.
how am I going to how am I going to raise her where she doesn't get trapped into some of these moral hazards of being, an attractive female in this society where, she'll be given a lot of privilege and attention that may be undeserved in some ways. And so I think I guess so I'll diagnose kind of what has been happening, which is, so you have all these women who are attractive to get, opportunities that they otherwise would not get. So therefore they don't see the real cause and effect that should be there of like, okay, well, I worked really hard to become
Yes,
competent at this
yes.
thing, or I really worked on my character and therefore I achieved this. And I have seen, different people where if for a female, if they're not attractive, it's the opposite. Like everyone gives them a hard time. They could go to the car shop, they're gonna give a hard time. Like they struggle, like people,
You
like
mean
they
if
have
they're
to
like if
fight,
they're ugly, like if they're like
right? Or
major weight
overweight
issues?
or something
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. So there's going to be an inverse, like a negative sense override towards
yeah.
them. They're almost going to assume that they're not competent, and they're going to, assume that like they just are going to be treated more harshly, maybe not taking this seriously. Whereas if a female is attractive, like, every customer service interaction is everything's beyond the silver platter. But what can happen is with a lot of females, they don't realize, they think that's just how the world is, and
They're
they're
living
having
a
these
filtered
interactions.
life. They think it's
Yeah, it
normal.
filters life, right?
Yeah,
But one day they will get older, they won't be as attractive, and then all of a sudden they're like, well, what the heck? Like, what happened to all these people that now they're all jerks, and
right,
they didn't realize the whole time they were being treated a certain way because of their, attractiveness. And so
right.
obviously we can't change how other people are going to approach us or whatever. But I do think if someone's more, yeah, I guess it goes back to parents, like I want to teach my daughter to be virtuous, but like meaning that I want her to have like the habits and disciplines of being able to live in the reality of how things are and to function well, know what it is that she needs to set her mind on for human flourishing, what types of habits and disciplines is it going to take to get there, and then have her thinking, her feeling, and her doing just well aligned, whether they're just all well ordered,
Yeah.
to that. And so I think, yeah, it really starts with parents and
I
the type of situations you put your kids in,
yeah.
and then
I really
probably, oh good.
no continue. Go ahead. I was.
Yeah, and I think where this can also be avoided somewhat. I think like if my daughter wanted to go to college, after she graduated from high school, I would encourage her to go to one that was extremely rigorous academically, where professors and people aren't going to give
Coddle
her a
her.
silver platter just because
Yeah.
she's attractive. It's
Yeah.
like any opportunities I put them in, I'm going to want to. I would want to put her in a situation where I'm pretty confident. Hey, like these people are not going to be too biased based on her beauty. They're really going to approach her based on her level of competence, her level of character, her social skills. Because
Right.
how many people do we know? I shouldn't say people do we know. How many times have we experienced or seen or heard others experience or seen where there's the stereotype that the blonde bimbo, and the reason maybe she's a bimbo is because she's never had to have in-depth conversations. She's never like been
Yeah.
had dynamics where she even needed to go there, and so she's
Right.
developed this sort of character where she can't talk deeply. And that's not to say that there aren't attractive women who aren't virtuous and who can't have deeper conversations, but I think you have to be more intentional to have that outcome. Like it's
Right.
much likely to have the outcome of the bimbo, to be quite honest, in our culture, than to have someone who's competent and of good character. I was going to jump onto the male side of things real quick. I mean, we've already touched that in a couple times, but I don't have it in front of me. But there have been a lot of research studies that show that the taller men tend to do much better in terms of career earnings, ascending the corporate ladder, and then especially dating. I think there already was a difference, but with online dating, it's put it on steroids. I think you could have one guy who's like 6 foot, another guy who's like, I don't know, 5'6". They could look exactly the same, make the same amount of money and everything. And if you put them on virtual, an online dating app, like the shorter guy is going to be ignored. Like I think of something ridiculous. It was like 90% of the time. Like it's just you're blown out of the water. And so I think, but where I want to live in the reality of how things are, yet also seeing how that there's a more complex overlay of all these different factors, is that okay? So there's this whole I'm trying to think of the term sexual dimorphism, which
Mhm.
is a description of the typically guys are bigger than women in terms of height. They have more muscle mass, they have a deeper voice. So there's all these external visual or sensory, whether because the deepness of a voice is more of what you hear. Everything else is, I guess, sight. But
Right.
there's all these things that typically men, are again, more muscular, deeper voice, taller, and all these things. So the less a man is sexually dimorphic, different from a female, it seems like there would be less attractiveness in that area. Because I mean, that's conversely, that's why a straight guy is attracted to a woman who precisely exhibits the
Right.
characteristics of a woman. And so
Right.
I think back to that other example of that guy who's going bald, but did well in the female department. I I think that's because there's more. While height is probably the easiest privilege, the lowest hanging fruit in terms of initial presentation of status or possible status for a female. There's still the humor. There's still social skills, the confidence, also how much money you make. That's also a
Huge.
thing. Right. So that's where I think, and what this reminds me of a study. It's very hilarious. So it was a study given to males and females, and it showed, like, let's say 5, females to these guys, and they put the same female in different clothes. Maybe it was like, working at McDonald's. They were in a McDonald's uniform.
Yes, I remember
Another one was
this.
that they were
All these
janitor.
different
Another
all these
one.
different roles, and the guys didn't care what she
Right. They
did.
found them just as attractive. Yeah.
They
Whereas with
didn't yeah.
yeah, they did not care at all. Whereas
You could
with the
put the handsome
females,
guy in a burger flipper, McDonald's uniform, and he's like looks like a stud, but they don't really care about him. But then when you put him in a
yeah, the
flight
women didn't
suit,
find
he's a
him
fighter
attractive.
pilot.
Yeah.
He's suddenly super attractive. Yeah, yeah,
Right. So I don't think so. Yeah, height can, initially, especially on online dating apps, has, a huge advantage, but it's because there's this yes, there's this sexual dimorphism, but then there's also kind of an assumed kind of in the back of your mind, like they probably have a higher social status. They're probably making more money.
Right.
They do better in social circles. There's all these assumptions that kind of follow with that, and these women
Right.
aren't like objective or not objectively. They're not consciously thinking through this. It's just kind of like all happening
Or
behind the scenes.
subconscious. Yeah.
But again, there's it's not like it's hopeless for guys who are under 6 foot, but they certainly have to work a lot harder. And it goes back to Jordan, Peterson, where he was saying, hey, like, yeah, there are people who are born with certain disadvantages and they don't have certain privileges, and you can either just,
wallow in
lay on the
self-pity
floor
or
and
yeah,
yeah,
or you
or
can
get
work.
up and realize I'm gonna have to work twice as hard, but I don't want to just stay here on the floor. I want to be successful, and I'm gonna, using Kobe Bryant, I'm gonna have the Mamba mentality and do whatever it takes. In his
Yep.
case, he actually wasn't the fastest, most athletic, most skilled, and I would go on down the list, but he outworked everyone. And so
Right.
I think at the end of the day, someone who, and this is what conservatives have been saying, which I agree with, is that if you work really hard persistently, it's not guaranteed, but your chances of a better outcome are certainly a lot better, and you're going to be a good person for it. You're going to develop good character. And I think obviously, and this would be another discussion, but a lot of that comes from your family culture and the larger community culture that your family culture derived its culture from.
Yeah.
But all things being equal, beauty literally is only skin deep. And so it's like, okay, well, what else do you bring to the table here? And
Right.
what
Right.
and the other thing that I think guys need, because the whole red pill community seems at times, you know, obsessed with like, oh, well, I just want to be like a really attractive woman. And so I need to do all these things so I can be with a really attractive woman. It's like, okay, well, you're thinking short term, like extremely short term. Like, well, what if you want to get married and have kids, what type of woman is going to be a good mom and who's going to be a good spouse, and what type of character qualities? Like, how's your home life going to be? And it's like people aren't thinking through these things. And I know obviously there's a part of being a human that you just kind of love at first sight, and you're just that's part of what keeps the species going. So I'm not saying that all should be thrown out the door, but because our there already is that aspect that's in all of us. So if you have children, you want to do everything you can to help them be people of character and competence and put them in situations where they're not going to be artificially rewarded for their attractiveness or maybe natural charisma, where you want them to learn good competence and good character. If you yourself are an attractive person, you probably need to look inward and see like, okay, well, what opportunities have I gained based on this, and maybe I've missed out on developing certain competencies or certain character qualities that I need to circle back on. Then I guess the third one would be more self-aware as to the bias you might have. Like if you were going to search for, I don't know, like a banker or attorney or a doctor, like especially if you're a guy, look at reviews, look at where they graduate from, and because you could easily, without
Yeah.
thinking about it, just go with like again, it's not going to be conscious. You're not
Leverage
going to be like,
leverage wisdom.
yes, leverage wisdom. Go with someone who's competent. Don't get sucked into, well, she looks attractive. And here's the other thing that I think that I did meant to mention earlier. If a guy is single, and women actually do take advantage of this. They know that, like, hey, I'm actually single. I'm not going to date anyone that I'm engaging in this job, but I'm going to leverage the fact that guys think they might have an opportunity to get with me, and so I'm going to chat them up, and I'm going to get client upon client upon client, and
Yeah.
so I think that guys need to be aware of, hey, don't kid yourself, just because you go to the bank and this banker's chatting you up, that she's interested in you and you have a chance with her. I mean, every once in a while, maybe, that does happen, but I'm just saying chances are, she has her own social circles and she's going to find her man there, or even an online dating app. Like you're essentially, I don't want to say you're being played, but you're falling into this whole dynamic. Go with someone who is competent at, for the job you're needing done.
Exactly.
And, Lee, your dating life should be separate from that.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. No, it's a jungle out there. Being single, married, all the above. And it's definitely easy to succumb to the pitfalls of beauty just because, we're human.
Right.
Evolutionary psychology, it runs deep. It is in the DNA. It's really interesting. I think that kind of wrap up just looking at the overarching concept that there's to be human and to have all these behaviors that are rooted in evolutionary survival. It's a balancing of respecting these things that
Those
make us
powers,
what we are,
those
and
drives.
those drives. Because obviously, if we didn't have these drives, humans wouldn't exist.
Yeah, we would have gotten
They just
extinct
wouldn't.
already. Yeah.
We just wouldn't get extinct. Because if if golf or if jet skiing or riding motorcycles, was far and above like more interesting than sex, then we wouldn't be here. If killing lions was more interesting to cavemen than sex, then we wouldn't be here. So beauty bias really, ultimately goes back to that.
I was gonna say, you mentioned evolutionary psychology earlier, and I wanted to put in a plug for finance in a way that is reachable for the common man. So I think, unfortunately, a lot of Christians have been turned off by the term evolutionary psychology because they completely think, oh, well, it's rejecting God as creator,
Evolution
so
bad.
I have no place for engaging that. But all evolutionary psychologists are doing is they're looking at the reality of how things are, and they're sitting at a very deep level using deep analysis, scientific method of, okay, we see all these different things functioning a certain way. What would be a good reason for why those things exist or why they function that way? And I think that gives glory to God, because if we believe that God, created everything with a purpose, then it's like, okay, well, the evolutionary psychologists are helping us figure all the details out. And so I think that's where you can, and then this is where Aquinas would come in, is that he basically says, hey, prudence is, using, knowing, okay, what are the things that will help you flourish to function well, that are conducive to your flourishing / functioning, and
Yeah.
pursue those things. But it takes wisdom to even have knowledge of what is going to help you flourish, and then how do I achieve or attain those things, and how do I sustain those. And so you want to
And
be
there isn't a one size fits all for what those things are, depending on the person. There's some people that are cut out to be artists, and they're cut out to be like their vocation may what is wise and what is prudent for them. And I don't know what context you're talking about, and just like flourishing on like a human level, or like what they should do to feel fulfilled.
oh
Because there
sure
isn't, I
well
don't think there's a one size fits all for what everybody should do to be fulfilled.
I think I guess without going too deep into this,
Well, you brought in
yeah,
prudence into the
right. Yeah.
picture.
So part of prudence is realizing, okay, I'm in this current context, which includes, geography, age, health,
Mm-hmm.
family, community, just all these different things. What opportunities do I have? Which opportunities do I not have? And you have to look at all those things and say, okay, well, I think there's certain, from a high level point of view, common things that's almost, that most men and women will flourish in terms of, my belief. I would say that most men and women are called to get married and to have kids, but to function well as a family in 15th century China could look very different from 21st century, I don't know, Venezuela. I mean, there's so many factors and circumstances, and it takes a prudent person to reason well through all the strata of all these different variables. But I guess what I was going back to in terms of just something that would apply to all cultures everywhere is looking at the drive to reproduce for
Mm-hmm.
guys. So the sex drive is that it's like, okay, well, that drive is there for a purpose. I hadn't actually realized this until I started studying the word. It kind of almost happened by accident, but I was listening to this podcast, and this guy was talking about the term chastity, and he was saying, well, it has a big turnoff because people kind of assume this Victorian kind of like puritanical approach to it. But he said classically, according to Aquinas, what it meant is using reason well, and you're letting your sexual energy flow, and you're in command of it in a reasoned way. So you're using, and what he's saying is use reason so you have all these drives, these appetites, but you want to use reason well to steer them in a certain way. And the whole idea of temperance was not to just it's not about just totally like cutting yourself off from everything enjoyable. You're reasoning well of like, hey, like this thing is good for this purpose in this setting. So therefore, I'm going to have a glass of wine with a steak dinner while I'm having a date with my wife. It is a good flourishing maybe way to have a glass of wine versus I'm gonna have 3 glasses of wine on my lunch break and I have to go back to work. It's just like that would be being intemperate, so like you're using reason well to integrate all your bodily appetites, which have a purpose, but you're integrating them all together so you achieve flourishing in this bigger picture of life. And so I think it's encouraging people, don't be so, going back to the OnlyFans, where people are just so short term focused on, I just want to make a lot of money. It's like, okay, what type of life do you want to have over the whole part of life? And taking that into context.
I think they straight up don't even know.
I completely agree.
Because well, like if you ask them, they probably wouldn't even be able to give you any sort of detailed outline of what that would be. They might be able to speak in really, really broad generalities. Oh, I want to be successful. I want to have a big house, and I want to have a family someday.
Yeah, but they have no idea how to get there, or even if they got there, what kinds of things would they, skills, habits, character qualities to actually do well at those things, and I just think that people don't put a lot of thought into things. And so I think maybe it was Socrates where he was saying, a life that is not well examined isn't worth living at all, essentially that you want to constantly be thinking through. I mean, not when I say constantly, not where we're neurotic and we're just like OCD, but in a, going back to temperance, in a temperate way. Think about your life and make sure you're on the right trajectory and you're doing the right sorts of things that's going to help you, and use your bodily appetites and drives to help you get there, and don't let them get out of control and basically cause chaos in your life. And so I think it's more about a well-ordered life so you can enjoy it versus just letting the dogs run rampant and everything's just like chaos.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's a thing called assortative mating, and it's basically saying that
we talked about this.
Yeah, fives will be with fives, the fours with fours. But it also depends on culture, because a 7 in Indian culture may not be a 7 in Chinese culture. So
correct.
Yeah, so a lot of it is stratified based on culture. And there's different things that maybe one culture, you can a man could climb the status hierarchy a certain way that in another culture he wouldn't be able to, because women status hierarchy can be associated with providing well, and because that's, I think, something that's innate in every woman who wants to have kids. She wants to be with a man who can provide well for her children, which that would be cultureless, but it's also going to be applied differently in different cultures, because what a man needs to know or do to provide well could not wildly, but somewhat be differentiated between cultures.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely.
On a broad scale, variables such as physical attractiveness, income, education, social strata ranking, and character go into mate value, with the varying levels of weight or priority given to each variable. So again, those are all variables that go into like this overall view of mate value. And then also you could have that there's things that detract from mate value. So that's where there's like, you have to weigh out the whole thing. So on a more nuanced level, assortative mating has multiple layers to it. And this gets back to what you were saying that I wanted to address. So physiological, which is physical attractiveness, income, education, cognitive and behavioral, which would be personality, competency, along with environmental geographic factors. So this goes back to what is differentiated between cultures and geographies. So a population may be segregated into phenotypically differentiated clusters. That's kind of a mouthful, but basically phenotype meaning like what you look like physically. So if we went to the Pygmy tribe, they're all going to be, shorter, or, the Zulus, they're all going to be taller, that's just kind of low hanging fruit. I kind of amusing.
Yeah, but
as an
it's a
example.
simple way to make the point. Yeah.
Yeah, but these clusters of phenotypically, differentiated, people groups, they create mating pools of similar individuals on multiple layers, which is called stratification. So like God created a good world to function a certain way. And when things are functioning well and flourishing well, we find those things beautiful, like because it's, and I think that's what's important. Maybe is another takeaway is that being fat objectively is not beautiful because you're not functioning well, and that's why we don't find it attractive. And I think that's you're a well-ordered, well-aligned with reality. If you don't find it attractive, precisely because God made us to find things that are functioning well as being attractive. However, we should also be aware of like, well, does that mean then just because I find this unattractive that I don't see other aspects? Like, let's say there's someone who's like 300 pounds overweight. Does that mean then that if they're a good attorney, I'm not going to go to them just because they're overweight? It's like, well, what if they're actually competent in what they're doing? So you want to...
They have an incredible reputation and you probably won't care.
Yeah, so you want to...
If they've never lost a case, and the guy, if this attorney is, 350 pounds and he's 5'6", that's an extreme example, but he's never lost a case. He's probably going to do okay as an attorney. It's not because of his looks.
Yeah, so I think it's almost like everything has its place. So beauty has its place, its purpose, but don't let it spill over into other things that it shouldn't and affect your ability to reason well. I think maybe that's a take-home message. Is it has its place, but don't let it spill over into other areas that it's doesn't have any bearing on reality.
But then also accepting the fact of reality that there is some beauty that is just innate. It is there, and it is recognized by everyone. There is innate beauty.
Yeah, no, and that's what I was saying earlier. There is innate beauty because God created the world to function a certain way, and He made us to objectively find things.
Right. Yeah. Well, I was just reiterating. I was just shortening it down to that innate beauty because
yes. Yeah. It's objectively
what
innate.
It is.
And it happens behind the scenes without you're even having to you don't have to think it all through. It's just all happening in the background in your mind. Yeah, completely agree. Well, this has been fun, and there's a lot more topics to unpack and uncover. I already mentioned about 8 or 9, so I guess those will come forth in future episodes.